Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast today from Vancouver in Canada, Jen Moss. Jen is the co-founder and chief creative officer of JAR Podcast Solutions, a branded podcast agency working with organizations like Amazon, Lululemon, and Deloitte. Some really well-known names. Now, with a rich background in creative writing, radio at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and interactive storytelling, Jen helps brands design podcasts that serve a clear job, a clear audience, and a clear result. Hence the name JAR Podcasting. And as a result, they build trust and build real community. Welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast, Jen. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you so much, Jürgen. It's really nice to be here.
Now, before we begin, a quick orientation for our listeners. On the Innova.buzz podcast, we explore how people create impact through human-centered conversations. And today with Jen, we'll dive into branded storytelling, the realities of corporate podcasting, and the critical question, which is something that really is occupying mind space for me today, is how do we use AI without losing that human connection that makes any of this worth doing? At the end, we always wrap up with the signature buzz round, 3 rapid fire questions that I ask every guest. And all the resources and highlights from today's conversation will be in the show notes. So Jen, reflecting on our earlier conversation, what truly stands out is how seriously you approach both the craft of deep, honest audio and your genuine curiosity about new media and about AI, and how you help brands, students, and audiences meet that vital space between efficiency and connection. So what impact do you aim to make in the world through the shows you help to create and the conversations you steward?
Thank you for asking that question in that way. What impact do we hope to make? Because the impact that I hope to make, and the reason we started our company, which we normally just shorthand it JAR Podcast Solutions. It is JAR, but we shorten it to JAR because JAR gets hard to say after a while. But yeah, the reason we started JAR was we wanted to help facilitate deeper conversations that were more meaningful and nuanced, that went beyond sound bites and beyond. Everybody loves a fun TikTok video. Don't get me wrong. I love those things. But there is a way of communicating and connecting with other people that involves a little more patience and a little more time and a little more nuance. And I have always, as a storyteller, been drawn to those kinds of content. And so that's one of the reasons we started JAR, was to help our clients have more nuanced conversations, because a lot of them are there, like you mentioned in your introduction, some big brands with some impressive track records who are really well positioned to speak on a variety of topics and to facilitate important conversations around a variety of topics. Like, I feel that brands are powerful entities, and not only do they have an opportunity to wade into social discourse, they actually have an obligation, because they're impactful organizations. They're big employers. They use resources, and they sell things according to various trade regulations, right? So their brands are part of the world we live in. And I think that the more that they can engage with society and show their strings, as it were, kind of actually demonstrate who they are behind the facade of the brand, the more people are going to be interested in them, get curious about them, want to learn about them, and ultimately, of course, the idea being want to buy from them, because we do live in a capitalist society, and so brands don't do anything ultimately unless they think they might be able to sell you something at the end of that rainbow, right? But I think that that's a far off goal, and there's a nearer goal, which is to win trust, win hearts and minds. And in fact, I'd go even further, to earn trust and to earn hearts and minds. And I think podcasts are a way of helping brands. It's a channel by which they can do that. And so that's what we try to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you focus on that idea of having those deep conversations, because I'm sort of reflecting as you were talking, I was reflecting on some of the big businesses that perhaps we all come across from day to day, and one of the ways we encounter them most is through advertising, and advertising tends to be they're talking to me, rather they're talking at
I'm
me,
talking at
not
you.
even
That's the
they're
difference.
talking at me,
Yeah.
not even to me.
No.
And so one step above the talking at me will be talking to me. So in other words, they're addressing my values, my needs, my interests. But of course, what you're talking about is the next step up, which is they're talking with me. They're having a
They're
conversation with me.
engaging.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So how do you see big organizations, big brand, making that transition through those levels?
Well, I think a lot of larger brands understand that there's different ways to reach people and that you need to do work at all levels of the sales funnel, right? So yes, you need to do like work at the bottom of the funnel to get people to press buy now. Sure. That's important. You got to do that. Listen, Black Friday sales, that kind of thing, they're all pointed at that pointy end of the funnel, right? But sophisticated brands that have been around for a while, especially, they understand the need to fill that funnel with interested parties at a much higher level. So create content that is that encourages people to peer over the fence and look in at the brand and see what they might all be about. That lodges the brand in the listener or viewer's mind so that later, when they do have a need to buy a product or service that brand might sell, they're going to remember that brand in a favorable light. So building trust, building confidence, building awareness, these are all the things that I think a lot of the brands that we try to work with do understand. And if they don't understand, we try to talk to them about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm involved with a local community bank, and it's an interesting model because we invest a large part of our profits back into the community through sponsorships and grants to organisations, to not-for-profit organisations. And a key message that we try to get across is that the more business we have from the local community, the more profit we have to invest back into that community. So by choosing to put your business with us instead of with kind of a bigger organisation that is a for-profit but has no interest really in the local community, you're actually doing something for yourself as well beyond the transaction part that is serving a need for you. Is there something from the work you've done that could be a lesson there in terms of getting that message out and having those conversations more with that local community? I mean, podcasting is a potential there. I think I've always sort of wondered, could you do a podcast? But it's probably not the right audience for that.
Um, I would argue that there's always an audience for a podcast. So one of the hats that I wear, Jürgen, is I also teach creative writing here in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia. And one of the things I'll always tell my students is that when you tell a story that is local and very, very specific, that story can have global resonance. So a mother in East Vancouver talking about postpartum depression will resonate with a mother in Tanzania having a difficult time after having a baby, So it's those kinds of resonances are that I always think that local stories are worth telling, and the audience they find on the internet might be global. It might be local, but it might also be global because the themes that you're identifying translate out, right? So the more specific, the more global the impact is how I approach storytelling. And so when you talk about working with a financial institution that's local and that's investing back in local businesses, that's a model that's repeatable and interesting that might be of interest to other communities that have, a similar need to reinvest in their main street or something like that, right? So I think those sometimes people undervalue the impact of a local story. And so I don't know if that's where you were leading with that question, but that's kind of what came to mind for me is that there's always powerful stories to be told that are local in origin. And also that there's value beyond sort of the immediate, like somebody's going to make a purchase. It's about building goodwill with your audience. So in the case of the financial institution you're working with, maybe them investing in the community makes the community feel better about them, right? And feel more inclined to trust them and work with them. And similarly, if you as a podcaster or as a brand who's doing a podcast, if you invest and give your audience something that they value, or you facilitate an important conversation that needs to happen, or you bring a voice from the margins that's been ignored that needs to be part of an important conversation, and you're the company that does that, you get to stand back and sort of bask in the glow of having organized an important, relevant conversation and being seen to be at the heart of a critical discussion in society and being seen to be the company that cared enough to make that conversation happen or to tell that story. So it's a halo effect rather than a direct sales approach, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. That's a really good point. On the topic of facilitating those conversations, and I mean, there's lots of issues in the world today that we probably need to have some deep and perhaps less charged conversations, shall we put it that way?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, I think.
How do you see the role you mentioned earlier about big brands having a responsibility to actually lead some of these conversations? How do you see the role of some of those big brands, for example, the ones you've worked with, as facilitating those conversations, and how can they do it in a way that does take the charge out of it? I mean, I'm thinking in some of the political stuff that's going on, or some of the philosophical questions around things like climate change, or things like homelessness or housing shortage, or those kind of issues where a lot of the public conversation is very charged and very polarized. How do you see these big brands stepping in and taking away that polarization, taking away that charge, if you like, to the point where there's actually a meaningful conversation that perhaps leads to some outcomes?
Tricky. I mean, getting creative freedom in a branded environment as a storyteller is pretty hard. And a lot of it is about establishing trust. So what we do with our clients is we have a lot of conversations about brand safety. First of all, we get it all on the table. What are you worried about? What are you worried is going to come back in your face? We know that you're good people and you feel this way about this issue. What are you worried about what vein are you worried about opening up if it's taken the wrong way, or, like who are you, what kind of backlash are you concerned about? We make sure that we're aware of those pitfalls or the potential backlash. We don't want to lead brands into danger, right? But at the same time, I do find that sometimes brands have these blind spots where they're like, well, we're not gonna talk about this thing because it's controversial, therefore we're not gonna mention it. And simply by not mentioning it, they end up exposing themselves even more than had they mentioned it and tried to present a balanced point of view. So one of the ways that I'll talk to brands is about not underestimating the intelligence of the audience, not being afraid to demonstrate complexity. So if you're telling a story, we had a client that was a mining company, for example, here in British Columbia, Canada. It's a very good mining company. It's got a lot of wonderful scientists working for it. Mining in Canada is a highly regulated industry. Do they have a perfect track record? No. Mining is a dirty business, right? And mining has a bad track record in many parts of the world, especially. So, and Canadian companies have not always been blameless in other countries when they go in and put in large projects. So this mining company wanted to tell the story of how mining is going to be an important part of the electrification of the future. You cannot have solar panels. You cannot have wind turbines. You cannot have electric cars unless you have critical minerals, and critical minerals come out of the ground. Full stop. Yes, you can recycle some of them, but most of them come out of the ground. And this is an inescapable fact. So if Canada wants to hit its electrification targets, then mining has to be part of that picture. So they wanted to do a podcast about that. And I said, well, great. But there's a lot of people who are going to view this conversation as greenwashing because you're a mining company and you're daring to open your mouth about electrification. And you guys have been plundering the earth since time immemorial. So I have to be quite blunt with them. And then they were actually really receptive. And they said, yeah, we know we have a trust problem. And in fact, they pointed me to, I think he was the head of the Canadian mining, or it might have been the global mining organization, who had led his keynote speech at a big mining conference with that exact topic of, I think the topic was, mining has a trust problem. And I said, well, if that guy can talk about it, then you can talk about it on your podcast. What is that trust problem? Why do people have an inability to trust mining companies? What is the track record? What are the reasons people have that suspicion? Because until you deal with that and acknowledge it, people are not going to take you seriously. Full stop. They're just not. And so I was really impressed with this company because they did create a whole series that looked at the trust problem in mining and then went on to talk about the innovation, the technology, the incredible work that's been done around environmental mitigation and remediation after the mines go in, right? There's a lot of wild stuff happening that is really proactive and excellent. But before you can get into any of that science, you have to deal with the basic hesitation on the part of the audience, and you have to honor it fully and acknowledge it in your content. So that's an example, and hopefully that's shows you a little bit about how we work. So we can be we just try to be realistic with clients about what the audience is likely to think. And then we try to address that as best we can through the content, which is the only power that we have as content makers. We're not kings, we're not queens, We're content makers. And so we're given this one platform and this one opportunity to have a conversation. I personally think it's really important because I could have that same conversation in front of a group of, dyed-in-the-wool environmentalists, and they'd all be nodding along. But if I get to have that conversation in a more mixed space and with a more mixed audience who might have differing opinions on mining, I actually think it's a way of introducing challenging conversations to new audiences and helping to break down silos between those audiences. So that's one of the reasons I actually really love storytelling in the corporate space, is because it's a new, fresh audience. I spent years working in public media, preaching to the converted. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly, one of the things that I think could be really valuable out of that exercise, and you mentioned there at the end the breaking down the silos and getting not just those conversations between, in this example, the mining company and its audience, but between different audience groups that have different views and different approaches, can surface a lot of interesting ideas that could go back to the mining company in terms of, how do we address problem X? Here's some other ideas that have come from our community or from our audience in the community space. And it reminds me a little bit.
You can introduce new voices to new audiences, right? So we do a podcast for the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC. Their primary audience is Bay Street investors, like wealthy Canadians and, people who care about the economy at a very high level because they're heavily invested in it. And yet we've had we've done episodes on women in corporate government. We've done episodes on Indigenous rights when it comes to major infrastructure projects. And so by doing those episodes, we're bringing those voices to a different audience that typically tunes those voices out. So I think it's really important when you talk about breaking down silos. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
You were saying.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I was just reminded of my career in the corporate world, which was in the chemical industry, and it's very, very similar in some ways. The chemical industry has an image problem in the general populace, I would say. That's probably a rash generalization.
Sure, but every single thing
close.
that you can touch is made of chemicals.
Absolutely, yeah. And I used to tell this story, speaking of storytelling, the funniest thing, or I mean, I found it funny, that I ever saw, and this is going back into the 1980s, so I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was a female reporter on camera getting stuck into the chemical industry, talking about how bad they were and how irresponsible they were, and she was talking about an environmental sort of standpoint and so on. And she said, chemicals are so bad and the chemical industry is bad. And she had makeup layered on like it looked like it was a render.
She was wearing most of the chemicals that you guys manufactured.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Terrifying.
I thought, well, if you're going to get up and talk about this, maybe you shouldn't use that much makeup.
Yes,
I mean, it didn't look that attractive either, but that's beside the point. It was.
It never does. It never does, in my view. But
I just thought it was so funny. Yeah. It was just so thick makeup and heavy lipstick and eyeshadows and fake lashes and everything that works.
I've also seen a similar thing when, a reporter is holding their iPhone out to challenge a tech company. It's like, there's a little cognitive dissonance going on. I mean, we have to be, at the same time, we have to respect. I do come from a reporting background, so working at the CBC here in Canada, and one of the things that I respect is the right to ask questions and the right to challenge, and that role keeps everybody honest, right? So I think there's a way to do it, though, that is a little more, like you said, a little less confrontational, a little more like, hey, have you thought about this? But what about this problem, right? Because I mean, the chemical industry, I mean, they've given us many great things, and yet there have been there have been mistakes and there have been terrible environmental disasters and all of that stuff. So the public has all of that. Your audience is not dumb. They hold all of that in their head, and then you're coming to them with a message. And if that message feels too one-sided, not nuanced enough, and not self-aware enough, they will see through that. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line that you got to walk.
Well, one of the issues I see with news reporting in particular, and I wonder how you deal with that in your podcasts and messaging from big brands. It seems like bad news is thousands of times more newsworthy than good news. So if there's an environmental spill, for example, to take that environmental theme further, if there's an environmental spill somewhere, that's, of course, it's tragic, but that dominates the news headlines for a long period. Now, if that company who caused that then goes in and cleans that up and transforms that space that they've actually polluted, transforms that into a really beautiful space by a fantastic remediation effort, that doesn't make the news.
Not to make the news, yeah. But I think that's where podcasting can come in, right? Because podcasting is like the news in that it needs to respect what it is that an audience is willing to listen to. But it's unlike the news in that you can tailor the content to be more balanced, to be more nuanced, to show the good with the bad, and to hold those things up side by side. And so that's, I think, why a lot of brands find it interesting, because it's like a way to tell a story that matters to them in a way that feels accurate to them. Yeah.
Okay. Let's sort of delve a little bit more into storytelling from the angle of AI. We've got this fantastic tool now at our disposal, and the more I discover every day, the scarier it gets on the one hand, and on the other hand, the more excited I get at the abilities of what it can do. So how do you see AI playing into the work you do, particularly from the storytelling aspect?
It's an interesting transition from talking about the environment to talking about AI. And I can't talk about AI without highlighting the very difficult problem of the amount of water that it uses, the amount of energy that it uses. So I'm very aware of the environmental devastation that it is likely to cause unless we can find a way to mitigate that. Cooling the giant servers, for example, is just outrageously difficult. So
Powering them as well, for a start.
So putting that aside as being something that is currently above my pay grade, I will focus on the tools themselves and the way we use AI. So we use AI daily to help with research, although we're careful about it because it can be inaccurate. We use it to do to tighten up certain editing tasks that used to be done manually, can now be done with AI more quickly. We'll use it sometimes for ideation. So give me 50 possible podcast titles. And I'll tell you right now, it'll give you 49 bad ones. And one that maybe has some potential that you can maybe work on. And so because you and I predate AI, we can look at it through the prism of our own experience. And we can look at whether the content that it generates is good or not good, is accurate or not accurate. My concern for the future is that we will lose the ability to discern and we will take it at face value. And I think that would be a sad mistake on the part of humanity. So the line that we try to draw at JAR Podcast Solutions is we don't use AI in anything where the ultimate goal is connection. So if the ultimate goal of a particular task is efficiency, AI can help. If the ultimate goal is connection, AI is not your friend. It actually has a distancing effect. It has a palpable, uncanny valley that it creates. The more realistic it gets, the weirder it gets. It's not the same, because I don't believe, and I know many audience members feel the same, I don't believe you can separate art from the context in which it was created. So a conversation of you and I right now having a well-meaning conversation where we're really trying to grapple with what AI is and what it isn't and what it means in the creative space. If we were just two AI videos talking to each other and weighing the intellectual pros and cons, rather than Jurgen and Jen trying to hash this out so that others can learn from it, it's just not as powerful. It's like, if you listen to a conversation about overcoming stage 4 cancer against all odds, and you found out later that conversation was written and recorded and created entirely by AI with AI video people in it, would that be more or less meaningful to you than a conversation with a real host and a real guest who had overcome stage 4 cancer? So This is the thing, is if you take the context away, the process by which the work was made, if you remove that and have it simplified into pressing a button, which is basically what's like taking an elevator to the top of the building instead of taking the stairs. It gets you there faster, but it's not very good for your legs. Like, it's just not the same, and the result might look similar, but it is not the same. And I think, to me, that's the line we draw at JAR, is that we'll use AI in interesting ways to help with efficiency, but we don't tend to lean into it for any tasks like final product type tasks that have to do with connection.
Yeah, that's a really powerful distinction. And I like what you said about the art. I can't remember exactly how you said it, but the core of the art is, key part of the art is the context in which it was created.
Yeah, the process and the context. Yeah.
I mean, I worry when I do something, I just go, oh, I could really supercharge this with AI, and I discover stuff and I get quite excited. But then I always ask myself, am I diluting my cognitive ability to discern?
Yes.
By
statistically, yes, you are
doing this.
Yes, you are.
Although there are some studies that say you're actually activating other parts of your brain, but I think
that's true.
I think it depends on how you use it. So a lot of the stuff I do is I discover things and then I dig deeper, because I'm sort of saying, okay, this can satisfy my curiosity. Whereas normally back in the days of just Google searches, I'd go maybe one level deeper and then I'd say, okay, I
give up.
don't have the time for this.
It's true.
Whereas
for deep
AI
research, deep research it's very useful for deep research. And I mean, also every new technology, Socrates didn't like the written word, right? He was against the written word. He thought that it would rob us of our ability to remember, which it did. It did. The ancient Greeks could remember much longer texts than we can, because memorization became less important because other parts of our brains took over, right, with the written word. So
so there are a lot of changes. I mean, I worry a lot. I mean, I'm a keen photographer and I worry a lot. Like in fact, I did an exercise the other day with a new tool where I actually took some of my photographs that had flaws in them, and the flaws. So sometimes I will take a photograph like that into editing software and I'll try to minimize the flaws. So this particular example was an amazing sunrise. but I got some internal reflections from the lens. So I cleaned that up a little bit in my editing software. I discovered this AI tool and I thought, I wonder what this does with it. And I fed it the image and said, clean up the reflections. That's all I said. And what came back was an absolutely stunningly perfect image. And I think if I were to put that image somewhere and just show it to somebody, it would not be possible easily for most people to say that was not an image I took.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, the original image was the one I took. And I've seen videos that were recently there's lots of videos of animals, wild animals doing stuff where
Crazy
I say,
things, yeah.
No,
like I don't think that rhinoceros was in that bathtub. Yes.
No, that's not possible. But the image, the video quality is pretty absolutely stunning.
So here's the thing.
You say, okay, where do you draw the boundaries for
That's
this?
why, to me, it's about process. Because for me, if you tell me I got up early, it was dark, I put coffee in a thermos, I drove down to the beach, nobody was awake yet, I made some notes in my journal, I drank some coffee, I waited for the sun to come up, I sat there, I wished I'd brought a sweater, it was kind of cold, but I pointed my camera and I managed to snap this picture. To me, the picture itself is more valuable because you went through that process. If you then use some AI tools to tweak it and bring it in line with a vision that you had closer to what you feel you experienced in real life, and if that's one of the tools that you as an artist and as a photographer choose to embrace, it's like souped up Photoshop, right? Fine, but I still need to know, and it matters to me that you, Jürgen, got up, went out and took that picture in the cold and in the dark that morning. And I almost think that we're going to start to see more behind the scenes, more show us how this was made, more kind of stamps of like organic human made content. That's going to start to matter more, not less, as we go into this era of not being able to tell at face value an AI work of art, especially in the visual space, an AI work of art from a human work of art. So, I think process becomes more important, not less important in that context. And it's almost like the wrong question to be focusing on. Does it look the same? Can you tell the difference?
Yeah.
Eventually, no, we're not going to be able to, because it is going to get really clean and really good, and it's already most of the way there, right? So I think a better question is, what's it going to do to our perception of art, to our perception of truth, to our ability to trust information full stop? And then that's where I think showing the strings at the puppet theater becomes very important. Yeah, the process. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, the puppet theatre. And I've been recently writing a weekly Substack article on Fridays where I talk about my photographs.
Nice.
And I'm
yeah.
I didn't plan to do what you just described, but that's what it actually is. So I'm kind of talking about what are the lessons out of this photograph, but from a point of view of, here's why I took this photograph. Here's what I was doing. Yeah, I got up early in the morning.
What was going through my head? Yeah. All of that matters. Yeah. All of that matters. It's funny, like we're also in an era where it's harder to separate the artist from the art. Like people are not so keen on Picasso because he beat his girlfriend or whatever. People are less impressed with Woody Allen because he married his adopted daughter. So we're in a time where people are not separating process from product very much. And that's a big debate that we could get into. But the reason sometimes I think AI-derived content falls flat, and why the internet is currently being called an empty mall, is because we're losing this ability to like really remember why we all showed up on the internet in the first place, which was to connect with one another. And if brands and companies and marketers can't get that through their heads, they're gonna start losing people. Because I don't actually believe that it's about volume. AI can help you generate a lot more clips a lot faster. Are they good? No. Do they still require human oversight? Yes. But one day they will be good and they will require less human oversight. So then you'll be able to shove a whole bunch of content out at once in this giant fire hose of content. And then the audience is simply overwhelmed with substandard mediocrity. And I'd rather see people do less content but do it better. I genuinely believe that over time, that is going to be the thing that really stands the test of time. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it comes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, which with that generating hundreds of bits of content and the fire hose approach, it's like now we're talking at people again.
Yeah. And my friend Steve Pratt, who started a company called Pacific Content, they're the first branded podcast company in the world, as far as I'm aware, also happened to be right here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Steve Pratt always says, why would you interrupt something that people want to do and want to be doing? Why would you interrupt them at that moment with an ad that they don't want, with some content that they don't want? Like, if they're interested in a conversation, present that conversation and allow space around it. I think people too often don't respect the real estate within podcasts too. Like when you create a podcast, that's a contract that you've made with that listener or that viewer, that they're going to join you and listen to that conversation. And if you kind of interrupt it constantly, not everyone, but a lot of audiences don't like that. They'll drop out. And we see it in the audience data of our podcasts. Like we see whenever an ad is run, we see the audience dip and drop off. And I mean, what's the point? If that's what you like, why are you interrupting something people want with something people don't want?
Yeah.
So at JAR, we make shows that we're very, very careful. And we rarely interrupt our own shows with ads. We don't view them that way. We view them as an offering to the audience that should be respected.
Yeah, I love that. All right, well, you've alluded to a couple of rabbit holes we could go down, but we could even talk about this topic a lot more, but I'm just aware of the time. So I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 3 questions that I ask of every guest. And
I'm ready.
hopefully we'll uncover knowledge or values or an attitude that guides you, and
Hey.
short, punchy answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome.
Oh, I hope so.
So first one's around innovation. So what's the most innovative way you've seen AI to use to strengthen human relationships or strengthen those conversations?
I think AI is really interesting if you can embrace it as like to think about your relationship to it as to how you're going to resist it. So right now I'm working on a project with some students where um, we created a VR environment, and in this environment we asked them to tell us, when a microphone records this, something that they secretly hate. And so they say that thing, and then the AI generates a text in praise of that thing. Kind of a mansplainy text about why the thing that they've said they hate is great. And then the next thing that we ask them to do is to rearrange that text and change the word order and make a poem, kind of like make a poem out of that AI generated text. So kind of reclaim their own agency within the experience. So that's just one example of like, I'm really interested in how people are exploring the idea of human agency by engaging with AI. There's many, many interesting projects where people are doing that. There was an interesting project I'm aware of with the Alcatraz prison where they used AI to do a ton of very quick research and very deep research. and they uncovered some new facts about an old mystery, for example, and then they told that story across social media. So that's an interesting and creative way to use the power of AI, but where a human or a team of humans is sitting there thinking about how they can make this interesting and how they can use it in a really interesting way, not in a sort of autopilot way where you're just going to press a button and it's going to barf up a script. Nobody wants that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which kind of, it reminds me of something someone said to me around the use of AI, and it was something along the lines of there's prompt engineering, which is like press the button and get the output, and there's having a conversation, which is an exploration. And it sounds to me like in the examples you gave, there's a lot of conversation that's happening with the AI before the output is then
Tons.
modified some more.
Prompt engineering is fascinating, actually, and I definitely think it is the new and interesting creative hat that we can all wear. It doesn't replace editing. It doesn't replace curation. Prompt engineering is like asking the same question over and over again and narrowing down the response, right? If you've engaged in prompt engineering, which I'm sure you have, Jürgen, it's like how to ask a question to get a desired result, how to engage in a dialogue that's going to get you the desired result eventually. It's quite iterative, prompt engineering. And so it is creative in and of itself, and it is fun to do, and I like it. But it's really different from editing, which is here, take this lump of clay and make something of it. Take this raw material and remove things and add things until it's great. It's less about prompt engineering is a giant act of what if, whereas editing is like what is, and let's reveal that. So they're really different. They don't replace one another. And it's a mistake to think that they could, I think. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Now, thinking about your own experience, I mean, you've given us one from your own experience, but what's the best thing you've done to integrate AI in a way that enhances human connection or prompts those human conversations?
Well, we did an experiment. I could tell you about. It was called A Tale of Two Podcasts, where we challenged a human producer to make a podcast on the topic of slow travel. And then we also challenged a human producer to work with AI tools only to create a podcast on the topic of slow travel. So in the first case, the woman went and created a very moving human reflection about a time that when she was young, when she traveled in Egypt, and she took a detour to a small village, and she was surrounded by stray dogs all barking, and then the villagers came to her rescue, and she had an amazing experience and got to know the people in this small village, because slow travel is really just backpacking. It's really just spending more than a day in a place. It's like spending a month in one town kind of thing and learning about that place. So she told that story through her own experience, through the lens of her own experience. The AI, we used it in a lot of creative ways. Like we used it to, we were testing all the tools. So we were testing 11.io to work with AI voices to see what they would sound like. We used it for script writing. We used it for ideation. We used it to come up with a title. Basically everything that you could use AI for, we used AI for on that project. And then we had two final pieces. And we looked at the difference between like how long each one took to create. They were about the same because there's a learning curve for the prompt engineering on the AI side that actually takes time, right? So they were about the same all told. But if you removed that learning curve, you could get faster and better at prompt engineering. You could reduce that time. But when we did this experiment, it took the same time. And then we put it out to 100 people for just some impromptu, like, which one do you prefer? So what do you think the result was?
50-50?
Nope.
No?
99 out of 100 people preferred the human one. 99.
Okay.
We think
so they recognized the
the
difference.
one person might have hit the wrong. Because the final result of the AI-driven content felt cold. It felt
Okay, yeah.
informative, but cold. Whereas the
Mm,
human-led one that was really story-driven and, like, is it possible to make better AI content? Yes, it is, but you have to use a lot of human intervention. So at that point, it's kind of just faster to work with actual humans. Like, so
yeah.
so this is the thing. So I think that that's, to me, that's one of the more creative ways that we've used it as a company, is just to really explore what the tools are, how well do they work, what the impact is on the audience. And, we felt that we were given marching orders by that experiment. We really understood what the mission was at that point, which was to remember the human in the machine
Yeah.
is very
It,
important.
yeah. I've got an article that I wrote a while back on Substack, and it talks about that very thing. So it comes back to what you were saying earlier about the experience part and the photograph. So again, my article was about photography, and it talked about this image that I'd taken, and I said, well, I could probably create a similar image and probably a really good image with an AI tool. However, the AI doesn't know that I had to walk 2 hours and climb over some rocks to get to this spot. It doesn't know that I was actually cold
Yeah. It
before I
doesn't
got
know
there
that
because
you,
it was early in the morning. It doesn't
yeah,
know that I waited there for half an hour to get the light just right, and
yeah,
all these things. So I talked about that. So it's
yeah.
and I guess in your example of the podcast, there was the experience element shone through in the one case.
Yeah. And, so like, to me, I'm really interested in what AI can and can't do, and what the impact of it is on audiences in different contexts. So that's something that we're going to continue to explore. And anywhere we find that it can actually speed things up significantly, we're open to using it, and we do use it. With the caveat that if we had a client that felt strongly about it, we don't have to use it. We're very confident in our own cognitive abilities. So far, we're hanging on to them, Jürgen. We're doing our best.
Well, the final question of the buzz round is actually along those lines. I mean, it was sort of what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves today in the age of AI and stand out as human. But I guess I'm sort of starting to ask it more in the point of view is what's the key skill that we need to be cultivating, we need to be maybe acquiring in this age of AI.
Um, I think it's really good to know what the tools are and what they can do. So, like, a constant curiosity about the new tools is healthy, I think. At the same time, I think understanding the value of human to human connection and being able to separate the tasks from, is it about efficiency or is it about connection, and being very clear with yourself about that, and then holding yourself to that line as creators, as brands, as marketers. Um, and remember that in a sea of shite, things that are not shite stand out. So quality still matters. And I think that's quality and authenticity is what podcasting was built on. Podcasting was what people ran to when radio became too formulaic, and too constrained and too surrounded by advertising. So podcasting still has this kind of Creative Commons feel. And I think the more we can respect that and hold it and use it and benefit from it, the better. But we do have to respect it and honor it and allow it to exist and thrive. And so if we try to kind of codify everything with AI and make the goal of everything efficiency of communication and volume, as in how much content are you putting out? If that's all we're thinking about, we're really missing sort of a real opportunity to connect, and we're actually kneecapping ourselves. We're as an industry, we're kind of undermining ourselves. We're making the internet less interesting overall. It's what Cory Doctorow has called the, pardon my French, but the enshittification of the internet, right? This is what's happening. It's a giant empty mall. We need to combat that if we want people to continue to come there, learn things, do things, buy things, use things, and exist, right? So, yeah, I think it's about being part of the solution.
Yeah, that's an important message, being part of the solution and understanding that, being aware of the tools, but also being clear about it's not about doing more of rubbish, it's about producing better quality.
Yeah, you were much more polite than me, but yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jen. It's been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about JAR Solutions and the work you do, and also maybe reach out and say thanks for what you've shared with us today?
I'd love to hear from people. It's just Jen at jarpodcasts with an s.com. And you can also contact us. There's a form on our website, jarpodcastsolutions.com. So yeah, just absolutely do check us out. Actually, I think it's just jarpodcast.com with an S. I always have to say with an S because apparently when Canadians speak, you don't hear the final S sometimes. So there you go.
Okay, so it's multiple podcasts, and
There
it
you go.
reflects all the work you do because it's
Thank
not
you.
just one.
Yes, that's right.
Excellent. All right. So to wrap things up today, what's a specific action you'd like our listeners to take away based on our conversation today, and maybe even
Ooh.
that transforms some
Well,
aspect of their lives?
I think just trust that if you have something to say, there are people out there that want to hear it, and think about who you're talking to and why you're talking to them, and really drill down into that, and you won't go wrong. I think that's my tip. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of people, I coach a lot of people for speaking purposes and of course for podcasting, and sometimes they say, well, I don't have anything to say. And yes, you do. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the AI. Everyone has a vast range of experiences, and each one of those little individual experiences might be of interest to other people.
Yeah,
And
and you
might
could put
teach
me
them.
you could put me on a podcast with someone who completely disagrees with everything I've just said, right? And that's the beauty of podcasting. It's a diverse field of opinions and viewpoints, and I think as long as you bring integrity, fact-checking, and generosity to it, you will find an audience. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your insights with us so generously today. Jen, I've really enjoyed our conversation. There's been lots of little rabbit holes that we've only just uncovered rather than dig deep into. So maybe there's another conversation in the future. All the best for the future, and please do stay in touch.
Thank you so much.